Alright guys, here's the deal. I'm going to give you fundamentals to know how to begin understanding Duel, and I'm going to give you a starting point, and then I will tell you how to build out from that starting point. And so the end result should hopefully be that if you're a complete beginner, you'll be not only able to understand how to program your own growth as a jeweler in this classic reimagining of the arcade FPS duel game mode that is inspired by Quake and UT and those legacies, but also to allow you to better understand what's happening at the pro level when you're watching the top players in the world battling it out. So the first thing is there are three things on every single map when you're playing an arena FPS game. You have the resources. So it's your armor, it's your health, it's your weaponry, it's your ammunition, and in this case, some utility in the Wii balls that are present on most of the maps. The second thing is the fighting, the techniques and everything to effectively do damage to your opponent to get the kill. And then lastly, it's the positioning, which is what informs you to know where to go when you're taking an item. How do you take the items? Like how do you route that on a map? Or how do you take the fight so that you can actually close down the fight? How do you avoid fights and still get items? How do you do unreturned damage and put yourself in a position where you can't be cut off? Positioning. So that's what really ties in everything together, I would say. And so those are the fundamental principles of what a duel is about, ultimately. So following that, there are three states a player could be in at any one time. They could either be in control, whereby they're running all of the items on the map and they are very stacked, they have all the weapons and they're controlling everything on the map. Or they're out of control, which is the opposite, where you have very little in comparison to your opponent and you have limited weaponry or whatever it might be, and you're looking to try to get into the last state, to kind of transition into the in control state. And that is, you're looking to get into a contested state where you've got maybe enough health and armor that you can maybe, if you get some extra damage, challenge for an item. Or maybe if you get some better positioning on your opponent, commit and really commit onto a big item like a red or a mega. So those are the three states: in control, out of control, and contested control, for lack of a better term for that third one. So in terms of a starting point, now that we have these kind of principles, this overall structure in mind, if you're completely new to Duel, I would recommend that you start with just ignoring that your opponent exists to a certain extent. Sure, he's going to, turn up every so often and maybe he's going to want to hang out, but you can just shoot him when he turns up and otherwise just go about your merry way running the items. Because what we want to generate here is an intuitive sense for the rotation of items on the map and practice the routes that we're going to be using to get from one item to the next as quickly as possible, as the case might be. So to start that, we need to know when what the intervals are for the respawns of items. So red armor and yellow armor, all the armors, these and blue as well, they all respawn at 25-second intervals. The mega health spawns at a 35-second interval, and that's all you need to know. So I wouldn't worry about being precise on your item timings to begin with. I just want you to get the rotation. And there's a situation that will happen fairly often whereby the red and the mega will be kind of spawning simultaneously, or the yellow and the red, or the yellow and the mega. They can spawn simultaneously. So that's something to bear in mind and to watch out for, and to know when that's happening and to make the better decision when that does happen. And the better decision is usually going to be depending upon the context. So I don't want to go through all the permutations of how that decision might work. But, I just want you taking the items. So I've got my reds. Just taking around 6. It's going to be back at 25. I'm going to take my yellow now. That's going to be back around 32. I'm going to take my mega now, which is going to be back around 50. So reds, yellow, mega. And I just want you to just do this. And then the success when you can move on to the next kind of progression, which we'll go to in a moment, is when you can do this reliably and against kind of your tier of opponent, and you feel really comfortable with this whole process and just taking every single item. I want you to have games where you just lock out the other guy, like he doesn't get any reds. I want a game where you don't give up a single red armor. I want a game where you don't give up a single mega health. I want a game where you don't give up a red or a mega health, or as close to that as possible, where it feels like you've really got a good grasp of this. Now, again, as I mentioned, I would definitely recommend that you don't practice against opponents that are significantly worse than you or significantly better than you. Significantly worse is better than significantly better for you at least, but I would try to keep it to players who are of the same level, slightly better or slightly worse, because that's going to give you the most room to grow and to achieve and kind of work on the things that you need to be kind of working on and achieving to guide your own progressions and improvement. Okay, so as I mentioned, you've done this. What is the next step? So the next thing really becomes about thinking about this other guy that's on the server with us trying to frag us. So we're going to go to those other 3 ideas now: in control, out of control, and contested control. So when we're going to the reds, we're going to pick up the reds. We're not just going to sit on it like we have been. We're instead now going to be taking a forward position, a slightly forward position that's about a jump away from taking the reds. So in this instance, you have 3 options, let's say in this particular map, Frontier and Diabolical. Either you're in this kind of corridor, or you're up here, as we just were, or you're down here. It's all about a jump away, and rocket jumps count as well. So, if I'm here, oh, I messed it up, but the rocket jump counts. So we need to understand, like, how do we make the decision to stand in one of these 3 locations as we are approaching a red that's about to spawn in 5 seconds? Well, the way we would make that decision depends on the state of our opponent. Is our opponent either in contested control or out of control? And right now what we're doing is making the assumption that we have control. So if our opponent is out of control, his objective is not to fight. The out of control player does not want to fight. The out of control player's objective is to maybe steal some timings, not steal the item itself, but understand specifically when it's going to be spawning, to do some and also to do some unreturned damage. That's ultimately the out of control player's goal, because the out of control player is the guy who has less than 100 armor to his stack, maybe missing some weapons, and he just wants to keep the pressure on. If you're a CS player, just think of it like rounds where you kind of half buy to keep the pressure on. You're not forcing it, you're not spending everything, you're not investing everything. You just want to keep your opponent a little bit honest, and to remove some future options from your opponent in terms of what they can do by limiting their economy. It's kind of a similar principle here. So in knowing that the out of control players' objectives are these, that informs our positioning. We don't want to play super passively if that's the case. We want to play a bit more aggressively. So you can try to play more in a more forward position. And again, this is a jump or 2 away from the reds. So this position is great because you can also see everything. This is a pretty nuts position. You can actually see so much from this position. And this is like the yellow. You can almost see the yellow from here as well. It's kind of nuts. And you have control of the teleporter exit here as well, which is also nice. So you get some serious vision here. The other option is playing down here. Now, why would you play here in comparison? If our opponent's smart and we've set the precedent that we're going to be controlling this position, playing this low ground instead, if he's trying to do some chip damage to us, we're going to be able to trap him. If he went upper and instead of going for some chip damage on lower, then that's fine. We just rocket jump. Obviously you want to avoid the jump pad, so you want to practice the rocket jump so you can reliably make that rocket jump and get onto the item. That's fine. We gambled that he would come here. He didn't. We're gonna use the rocket jump, and that's that's something we can afford to do because we're in control and we have a greater stack. So we can afford to buy some positioning with our stack. Is a concept that you can think of this. You can think of it in that way. Okay, so generally speaking, you're probably just going to want to play around the upper levels because it gives you the most options. It's the most versatile. You can also play it quietly and hide around the corners and set up traps and so on. If you try to do some damage, you can swing out and close down the kill. Alternatively, if you think that a passive approach is better and you think that he's in that contested control, then you can take things a little bit differently. You can play really aggressively, actually, if it's contested control, and really try to lock him out of the red challenge. Or you can maybe try to bait him in, take an off angle just here, or maybe if you're expecting to come through here, you can take it here as well, because you want to fight and you want to do some damage, kind of get onto the item. Or you want to give yourself the option where you do some damage and I fucked it up. Use some damage and you can kind of dash away. Obviously this is the new feature, the dash jump that Diabolical offers you, and you can kind of quickly cut off line of sight if the initial shot didn't go well. That's often what fights can come down to when there are contested stacks, the first bit of damage. And if it's bad, you can always decide to reset the situation and take positioning elsewhere on the map. So these are things to bear in mind. And if the guy's in contested control, he's thinking about actually taking the item mid-fight sometimes. So he might take more aggressive positioning. He might take an angle that's kind of hidden as well, you know, from your line of sight, and then kind of try to jump you. You know, that's a possibility as well. So you gotta be very wary of some of these tricks and maneuvers. Now, if you're in control as well, you know, there are situations where you're going to want to keep the pressure on. Maybe this item's coming up and you're thinking to yourself, I don't want to take this item because I kind of need to get some kills. I want to try to do some damage right now. So, and you know that he's going for the yellow. So maybe you get the opportunity, because I know that he's at the yellow and the Mega's not spawning right now. So he doesn't necessarily have much of an argument to go sit there. Maybe he's going to try to get these bubbles. I can try to punish him, get a rail in. Now, obviously, the red's quite far away at this point, but I know I can beat him to the red right now if I see him here. I can't actually make jumps, so that's great, but, you know, I know I can beat him to the red here. And, you know, you can get a nice little smooth jump all the way across. So you get the options to extend a little bit more. Once you start to understand the routes of the map and so on, you start to understand where can I get damage in. Because that's what this comes down to eventually, is just getting as much damage, finding as many spots for damage until you're in a spot where you can commit to the kills. And with that said, to recap everything, you want to, again, understand that the map is all about resources first. Then the resources, you know, necessitates in understanding, you know, positioning. So how can I best position to get the resources and to deal with my opponent and the strategy that he may employ. And then ultimately, you know, on top of the last element of that is winning the fight or doing the damage if it's a spot where I'm trying to do some damage and fall away. And then, you know, equally, we've got those three concepts of in control, out of control, and contested control. These are the three ways that the opponent, the opponent can be in one of those three states. So if you figure out which state that is, you then understand how much you can extend, and you can also figure out what he wants to do based on his state. So these are really important things. Now, the one thing I didn't go over is also the denial of weaponry, because this is a slightly more advanced concept. I'm just going to dip into this right now. If your opponent doesn't have an LG, there are a lot of spots, and I made a video with tips on Diabolical where I explain about LG, rocket, and rail, and how it's pretty fundamentally important to understand how to get advantages when you're having a rocket and LG fight, because it's close to mid-range. You can kind of tease them into a range where they want to use the rockets, then fall back and pull out the LG. At that point, you're going to get loads of unreturned damage. So if your opponent doesn't have an LG, this creates a lot of problems, and it gives you more options in certain fights. So being able to deny certain weaponry can be really effective. Likewise, the final thing I'll say on this, because I don't want to go too in the weeds on it, is that if your opponent has spawned and he doesn't have that railgun yet, or the pincer I should say, then you have this amazing option, because you know that up until the point at which he can get the pincer, I can generally kind of gravitate towards positions that allow me to cover it, or to cut him off if he escapes from this position or pushes, you know, like through the tally because he just picked it up, because I know that he's going to try to take this. So either I can commit more to like fully denying it from him, or I can understand that the fact that he needs it is a big problem for him, because he's trying to play out of control without a pincer. That's not going to work. You really need the pincer to play out of control. Now, this is one point I'll add here, is this is where some of the magic is when you watch the pro players, because the pro players are really good at being denied something imperative to playing out of control, but still making it work regardless, by understanding how to play the mind games. So there it is, guys. A bunch of basics and fundamentals about how to play Duel in an arena FPS game. I hope it was useful to you. If you have any suggestions for things that I should talk about to help you learn, you know, that can be the topic of future videos, please let me know. I would love to help you out. Thanks for watching.